Okay, good morning and welcome to this public scrutiny session today, which is held in the Council Chamber of Runcorn Town Hall with members of the public joining online. These sessions are a vital part of how we provide transparency and accountability to the public, and they allow us to test assurance, explore risk and ensure that policing across our area is well placed to deliver the priorities as are set out in the Policing Crime Plan. As usual, I will be the only one asking questions today on behalf of the public. Today's focus is on the workforce. The people of the Constabulary are central to the delivery of safer communities, reducing crime, modernising policing and maintaining public confidence. Almost every priority in my Policing Crime Plan depends on having the right people in the right roles with the right support. This is also an opportunity for me to thank those dedicated and committed officers and staff and volunteers in Cheshire Constabulary, whose hard work contributes to making Cheshire a safer place to live, work and of course visit. Policing is operating in a period of sustained change. Financial pressures, rising and fluctuating demand, evolving public expectations and a clear strategic drive towards modernisation all frames today's discussion. It's important that we get this right. Before I begin my questions, I will now invite the Deputy Chief Constable for a brief introduction.
Good morning, and firstly, apologies on behalf of the Chief Constable who can't be with us today. So the Constabulary continues to perform well, with overall recorded crime levels for 25-26 seeing a 1.3% reduction on the previous year. Burglary and theft offences are both down by 9% and criminal damage is down by 5%. Also, the national crime figures released last week show Cheshire remains a safe place compared to other police force areas, with the 11th lowest overall crime rate nationally, the 3rd lowest theft rate, the 5th lowest burglary rate and the 2nd lowest rate for shoplifting, which is obviously particularly pertinent at the minute. At the same time as these reductions, the latest national crime outcome data was also published, covering the period April to December 25. They show that Cheshire has got the highest charge rate in the country for all crime, the highest charge rate in the country for violent offences, the highest charge rate in the country for stalking and harassment, and the highest charge rate in the country for sexual offences. We've also got some of the highest charge rates for vehicle offences, theft offences, and residential burglary. Protecting the most vulnerable members of society remains a strong focus for the force. Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary has recently published their Spotlight report on the investigation of online child abuse and the management of sex offenders, with Cheshire mentioned several times in relation to good practice. This was an area in the last Peel inspection report cycle where Cheshire was the only force in the country to be graded outstanding by HMIC. The force can evidence high performance across a huge range of operational and support functions. For example, the most recent national information provided in relation to firearms licensing shows that Cheshire has the highest proportion of applications completed within 4 months in the country. We have also had recently very positive feedback from the Home Office Technology and Policing Unit on the approach we are using taking to using AI tools. The focus of this meeting is on how the Constabulary recruits, develops and manages the workforce that delivers these results. The Constabulary has an overarching people strategy which describes its overall approach. Given that 77% of our force budget is spent on staffing, this is a key area. Since the National Police Uplift Programme was put in place, the force has increased its budgeted officer numbers to 2,401, which has enabled the force to more effectively meet the operational threats and challenges. Despite this, our 275-page force management statement outlines the range of operational pressures which would require additional police resource to manage effectively. We are on track to meet the National Neighbourhood Policing Guarantee requirements for 26-27. Cheshire remains an attractive force for new recruits and there is a good volume of applications when recruitment is undertaken. Our detective capability has been a national issue over a number of years and Cheshire continues to increase its capacity and is now at 87%. This is important given the increasing demand related to protecting vulnerable person offences and vulnerability. Supported through Nicola's team, we have a strong approach to managing and developing staff using performance and talent conversations and talent grids. We have effective, structured arrangements in place for supervision and leadership training at all levels. We've got good governance in place for managing sickness and a substantial wellbeing and occupational health offer. There are strong arrangements in place in relation to diversity and inclusion, and the force has recently been ranked 15th in the inclusive top 50 UK employers list, with good range of networks to support represented minority groups. And in the last HMIC Peel inspection, the report the Constabulary was graded as good at building, supporting and protecting the workforce, one of only 13 forces in the country out of 43, which were graded as higher than adequate.
Thanks, Deputy Chief Constable. Look, I think that is a really thorough introduction with an awful lot of context about some of the successes that we see in Cheshire. We are the safest force area in the North West and we want to keep it that way. But we're also clearly leading on a whole raft of crime types with the fastest falls in those crimes across the country. So there's a huge amount of work to celebrate in achieving so much that you just mentioned. But the policing crime plan places a strong emphasis on reducing crime and modernising. This includes digital transformation, new technology and of course AI, which all too often we hear about in our everyday lives, and to some extent automation. These key priorities have informed the people strategy, and how well the workforce is equipped to manage these changes is therefore fundamental. So I'd now like to move us on to slide 5. And it's clear that the workforce must be fit to manage substantial change, including the adoption of AI and new technology, while maintaining ethical standards and public confidence. Do you believe this to be true?
I do.
Yeah. And on slide 6, which refers to the workforce establishment, are roles being undertaken at the right grade and by the right role type, and how confidently is the force redesigning roles where warranted powers are not genuinely required?
Okay, so if I wrap both of those up into one, for me, this is a real key leadership piece. We are one of the only forces in the country who have appointed an Assistant Chief Constable solely over innovation, essentially. We've got a high-performing and adaptable workforce who are very good at responding to challenges we face, and we've got a good track record of delivering financial savings and maintaining high-quality services to the public. Whilst we are really keen to embrace the opportunities that AI and new technologies provide, that's got to be done properly and with due sort of consideration to the fact it's public money and it needs to directly improve the services that we provide. So therefore, it'll be introduced with guardrails and safeguards in place in line with the National Covenant and ensuring that there's always a human in the loop and systems are tested for impact. And you're only too aware yourself, I'm sure, that new systems are intended to increase and not just maintain public confidence as part of the modernisation piece in line with your police and crime plan and maintain our efficiency and effectiveness. And as I said in my introduction, only in the last fortnight, our approach to how we are approaching the introduction of AI has been discussed with and then endorsed in writing by the Home Office, who are saying that we approach AI responsibly and ethically and we're making evidence-based and financially sound decisions. And then in relation to your second part of that question around warranted powers and when they're needed and when they're not, as part of our annual strategic planning and PPB process, each area and department considers the demands it's facing, the resources we have available and the opportunities we have to improve efficiency in the service we provide. We're currently in our 13th cycle of PBB, so 13 years of going through that process, and that work's undertaken with support from both Nicola's HR business partners and Paul's performance and planning team around how we see what's coming down the line, so to speak, and respond accordingly. And chief officers also have the responsibility of understanding the operational threats and demands at a force-wide level using our force management statement, which is 275 pages of detailed analysis. We need to ensure the national and regional obligations under the strategic policing requirement can be met. Conscious now that the government have also brought violence against women and girls into the strategic policing requirement where it wasn't previously, and that operational resilience and surge capacity can be met. I think it is fair to say we are in very uncertain times, both globally and nationally. We saw disorder the last 2 summers where we've ended up sending officers across the country to support that, some local, some more national. And then we've got some specific police officer posts that are required through processes such as College Police and approved professional practice. So we have, for example, inspectors in our control rooms because the guidance legislation says they have to be police officers to be firearms commanders. So we've got a number of roles like that across the organisation where you might look and say, well, that, you don't need a police officer to manage a control room. No, but you need a police officer to firearms command, and that's a key role of there. So we've also got the requirement to find appropriate duties for moderated officers who do not meet the threshold for ill health retirement, and in many cases they can bring experience and value to non-frontline functions. So we've got a number of moderated officers who aren't currently fit to be in frontline roles, but they're working in our criminal justice teams, supporting file building and directly adding value in bringing offenders to justice. But we do not routinely have deployable officers in roles where warranted powers aren't required.
Thank you for that. I mean, you've referred to the PBB as well. I just think it might be worth just explaining what PBB is, because for those who are watching from home or from work, mindful that we will have members of the press who join this. What is PBB?
So it's priority-based budgeting. It's our approach to how we budget, and obviously we've got a budget of over £300 million. As with policing uncertainty, it's we get a settlement every year, and we don't know what that is till quite late in the day. So it becomes around about how do we best use that budget. It could be easy to salami slice and just say each department needs to, for example, reduce by 5–10%. But what that wouldn't do is recognise that the changing types of criminality and the change in organisational threats, so such as online child abuse, sex offender management, some areas require investment, and therefore it's around every department head sitting with their HR business practitioners, what's changed in the sort of operational world which might increase demand, what efficiencies are developed where actually we can reduce that now. So we do look strongly at where can we do things more efficiently, more effectively, and reduce the resource into that. And then it's around where we do need genuine growth, making sure that that growth is done. So it isn't just a simplistic approach to. It's probably the best way I can describe it.
I think the reason why I wanted to sort of ask for a bit of clarity on is I think that what you describe in there, many members of the public would recognise through the organisations that they work in, that is the best way to maximise the budget that any organisation, private or public sector, have at their disposal. And certainly organisations in the private sector, for instance, it's not uncommon that they're just seen as a cost pressure on a larger organisation, and they have their budget regardless of maybe what they want, but what the organisation that they're part of can afford, and it's how they best use it. So it's a reassurance really that for the public that in policing here in Cheshire, the exact same process is carried out to maximise best value. My next question is with regards to the workforce model and whether it's resilient to demand spikes and sustained pressure. And you've sort of give some explanation there, but I'm particularly interested to see where the current pressure points are most acute.
So the increase in number of police officers over recent years and the flexibility that we've had have made that we are currently in a good position to deal with both national and local and national demand spikes. Obviously, I touched on the global issues and the impacts they're having. If we do end up in a world of petrol shortages, you'll see us having to no doubt play a part in that. And good weather often brings with it disorder and similar, as we've seen in recent years, and unfortunately the London arson attacks and the protests in Epsom. And I know that we've discussed several times the other ensuring demand pressures around protecting our vulnerable people in society. So in terms of where are we seeing that surge at the minute? So crimes likely to require what we call a protected vulnerable person resource, so rape, child abuse, domestic violence, child neglect, those sort of offences. That's more than doubled since 2018, when it represented less than 9% of all crime. For context, last year it was 23%, and by 2029 that's forecast to be 29%. And it is at the core of our policing values that actually protecting the most vulnerable is what we are here for, so it's quite right. The number of registered sex offenders which we require managing is forecast to increase by over 40% by 2030. That's gone up exponentially over recent years, and that is intrinsically linked to the online world. So currently, those involved in online child abuse material, we will prosecute them, and almost 100% of the time they will come out as a registered sex offender on conviction. That then puts statutory obligations around us and the management of them, which is quite right because of the threat they pose to children within our community. So it's that bit about our effectiveness in emerging crime types does actually then increase us demand further down the line. So that is going to likely continue to spike. We've seen the recent introduction of the Crime and Sentencing Act, which will see a sustained increase in demand on our specialist public protection and offender management teams. In essence, those individuals who you would expect or would have previously served custodial sentences now will be managed in our community. And a national independent assessment provided by the Home Office estimates the cost to Cheshire will be more than £1.5 million a year. So that is going to put pressure on us. And in addition, neighbourhood teams will be increasingly drawn into reactive risk management relating to offenders who remain in communities rather than receiving custodial sentences. So those people who we would argue should or previously would have been in prison will now be living within our communities, and therefore, as you would expect, your beat managers with warranted powers will be best placed to police them and then take enforcement action where it's needed, but it is likely to impact on the capacity to undertake preventative local policing. And national and international events mean that there's a requirement to maintain our effective public order and firearms capability. During the national unrest in 2024, Cheshire provided 15,000 hours of officers' time on what we call mutual aid, which is supporting the national policing function. But that was at a cost of over £400,000.
Again, I think you've given some really good insights there. I mean, I would definitely say my recent visit to the OK team, the online child abuse investigations team, was really impressive to see the work that officers and staff in Cheshire are doing in that space, which is understandably incredibly delicate as of an area of policing sort of arrest, the impact it can have on neighbours, the concerns that can be played out both online in the local community when police turn up and make arrests like that. So I was really impressed by the amount of thought and consideration that the Constabulary were putting in that particular space. I was also impressed by the fact that the online safety bill is so clearly working. Whilst there are some out there who would like to tear it up, what we're actually seeing now is referrals from big tech into the NCA for people who have got access to material they should not have access to and are circulating, and how that then is being referred through to local policing to take the necessary action. So what was impressive to see is legislation working and, of course, putting demands on local policing, but absolutely the right demand. You know, these are interventions that need to be made to make young people safe. So that was undeniably a real eye-opener to see that mechanism working. And I do accept that, you know, we've had summers with unrest, haven't we? And we know there's been huge pressure on the Constabulary to be reactive to that. I've also been impressed with those conversations that I've had with officers in my own community, but also things like the attestation evenings, where in many cases that is what officers have absolutely trained for, to make sure that when something of that significance happens, they put everything else aside and they serve the community that they've been asked to. And it's really impressive. That resilience that officers have is an absolute credit. In similar how we saw in COVID in our care sector and NHS, policing is seeing it on a yearly basis to make sure that peace is kept in our community. So, you know, huge amount of great work that goes on there. And I think your explanation just gives a bit of extra context around how you manage those pressure points. My next question is, the impact of vacancies and headcount pressures are being experienced. Are they being experienced evenly across officers, staff and PCSOs, or are there particular functions or cohorts carrying disproportionate risk?
So in relation to risk, that comes back into the force management statement and the priority-based budgeting. So the whole piece of priority-based budgeting is making sure that we put our money where our risk sits. That does mean that vacancies are more acutely felt within police staff roles, and given the financial scenario we're in currently, we are required to hold and scrutinise all police staff vacancies as they arise, and that's done between Nicola and myself on a fortnightly basis. We've also got a well-established resource management board that reviews staffing capacity on a bi-monthly basis and allows the Chief Superintendent and People Services to discuss staffing levels and prioritise the movement of officers and where needed staff. And then the established control and then the Savings and Efficiency Board that we've got review police staff vacancy levels in line with our agreed 6% vacancy factor, and then we approve recruitment requests in line with these levels. 6% is the baseline that we keep for police staff vacancies, although obviously in some teams we'll have, if we've got a team of 3, then we're not going to hold a 6% vacancy factor if someone leaves. Sure. If you've got a team of 200, it's much easier to maintain that 6%. And then our HR business partners and our monthly performance packs ensure that our data is central to issues of capacity being raised appropriately and timely, so that we can put solutions in place. And what I would say is we often talk about police performance in terms of outcome rates, crimes and everything else. We have the same performance management around our police staff department, so how quickly are occupational health referrals done, how quickly are we keeping the fleet on the road. So it's not a case where we neglect, for want of a better word, a police staff department thinking it'll be okay and there's accruing backlogs. So it's the performance management data along with the HR management data to make sure that we're keeping that money where the risk is.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful insight into how the constabulary manages that risk. Can we now move on to slide 8, which refers to the neighbourhood policing guarantee? Neighbourhood policing remains one of the areas of greatest public interest, and through consultation and engagement, including the recent precept process, that's where I ask the public how much they're willing to spend on policing for the future year. It was very clear that there was a strong support for PCSOs and, crucially, that visible neighbourhood policing presence. Can you clearly explain the current workforce model and the neighbourhood policing guarantee position as it stands today?
Yeah, so the baseline for the purpose of the neighbourhood policing guarantee was 249 neighbourhood resources, which was made up of 164 officers and 85 PCSOs. Our target for the neighbourhood policing guarantee is 297 resources, so a combination of police officers and PCSOs, so an increase of 47.7. You get the points because of full-time equivalents and the likes on our baseline. At the end of March 2026, we had 300.8 resources in neighbourhoods, so actually above where we needed to be for the MPG. So therefore, we've exceeded the increase by 3.8 resources, which we had 56 more officers in neighbourhoods than the baseline and 5 fewer PCSOs than the baseline. For 26-27, the target for the neighbourhood policing guarantee remains the same at 297, and as agreed through the budget, the workforce mix in neighbourhoods will change this year with 30 fewer PCSOs and 30 additional police officers, and the recruitment and posting of these police officers is currently ongoing. And we are reporting to the Home Office on neighbourhood policing resources on a quarterly basis to ensure we are on track.
Now, with regards to those PCSOs, the numbers that are obviously in the pack do refer to the previous year, or the end of the previous year, which obviously was a different position to where we are today, having gone through a very public explanation about that reduction of PCSOs, but the maintaining of 30 through precept and new monies that we found through pensions. What is the number? And I'm asking this very clearly because the recent panel meeting were very, very interested in this. What is the current number of PCSOs that we do have in the county?
Today?
Yeah.
51.
51. And there is a plan to move that up to 57?
The budget is 57. At the minute, we've got 51.
Okay. So we've certainly got 57 budgeted, because this is what will come down to understandably, an awful lot of scrutiny. We've budgeted 57 and we accept that we've got a degree of variance that happens. But is there a plan to get it up to 57, or are we?
At the minute, we are at 51. We've got a vacancy factor, which, as I say, plays in. we have our police officer recruitment and moves to fulfil the other half of the pledge that is ongoing. What we're not going to do is recruit and train 6 PCSOs, because that's a really expensive use of resources. So when we do our recruitment cycles, it will be for a number that is sensible to put on a training course for. In the same way, police officers, we don't recruit 6 cops.
Sure. Okay. I mean, I think that's certainly something that we probably need to discuss further, because I think the public have saved PCSOs, and so I think we do need to make sure that through that very clear pledge towards funding. So I do think we need to work harder at how we get to that number, because to not achieve that number could mislead the public. So I think we've got to get that right. It's a bit of a teamwork exercise. It's not all on the constabulary. The PCC provides the funding, but I think we've got to understand what that roadmap looks like.
Yeah, and we have a real clear commitment to meet the neighbourhood policing guarantee, and that target of 297 and make sure that we are over that, and we will continue to do that. Yeah.
Okay. I'm now going to move us on to slide 9, which is workforce capacity and recruitment. Obviously, strong recruitment, as we've already discussed, is important. So too is retention, particularly in the early years of service. What are the current patterns and drivers of workforce attrition, particularly amongst officers with less than 2 years service? And what risks does this present to operational resilience and value for money?
Okay, so overall attrition across the force in 25-26 was its lowest level in 4 years, with reductions recorded across police officers, police staff and PCSOs. And the improvement specifically in relation to officer attrition is primarily driven by the reductions in transfers and retirements rather than resignations. Through the Police Uplift programme, I think it's fair to say we saw some mischievous behaviour nationally around forces trying to meet targets by poaching people and offering people incentives to go, which led to a number leaving, and interestingly a fair few of them have then subsequently returned to us. So nationally and regionally, Cheshire's position has strengthened. We've moved from the 13th highest attrition rate nationally to 32nd, and we've got a resignation rate of 2.7%, which is below the national average. Regionally, we've demonstrated the largest reduction in resignation and transfer attrition over the last 12 months. From surveys of the officers who leave early in their service, there are themes around a lack of appreciation of the role, changes in personal circumstances and work-life balance. And in response to that, we've changed our familiarisation events and recruitment process to ensure that people better understand what they're signing up to before we spend money and time recruiting people and then making big career decisions sometimes to join an organisation that, or a role, should I say, that they're not necessarily suited to.
Are exit interviews consistently undertaken for officers and staff who do leave, including early service leavers? And how is the learning from those interviews used to inform supervision and workforce design?
Okay, so we can't mandate exit interviews. It's if someone wants to leave, that it's not mandated, but they are sent an exit questionnaire to complete, and that's then forwarded to their line manager, and then completed exit questionnaires are returned to People Services for analysis. And we monitor our completion rate and contact leavers directly to encourage their participation. And I think it's fair to say that we also undertake informal conversations at a sort of immediate line manager level to understand that. We've also got the ability for all leavers to complete their own, generate their own exit questionnaire, or request another manager or another member of People Services to complete it with them. So if it was an issue with me, with my line manager, then I can go and speak to someone else independently. And obviously we look there to sort of capture people and say, actually, we could fix some of these issues, so it gives us an opportunity there. Our HR business partners provide data through using our quarterly performance reviews, our monthly reports and People Hub to understand compliance within their area. And we do hold leaders to account where compliance is disproportionate in other areas. Our leaver survey results are now shared with all our chief inspectors and police staff equivalent levels, which enables operational teams to review the information and consider appropriate measures to reduce those attrition rates. And as I mentioned, we've changed those familiarisation events and recruitment processes to make sure that people really understand the role of a police officer and what they are signing up for. And it's not all fast cars and blue lights, which I think sometimes people think it might be. We've also introduced student voice surveys for student officers aimed at identifying key issues that affect them specifically in those first 2 years, and so we can sort of design them out of any process prior to an officer leaving the force. We've implemented dedicated time for students to complete their student voice as part of their initial training with student management, and that's resulted in an increase, a 6% increase in completion rates.
Now, you referred to the survey that people get on exit. You haven't given the data around what percentage, but presumably we do hold that somewhere. What percentage of those who leave actually do fill in that survey?
Yeah, we do. I can get that for you.
Yeah, if you could, because I think that is something that in itself is an indicator as to how comfortable people are with explaining why they're leaving. And if it is low, I agree that it can't be mandated, but there are ways in which you can get feedback without mandation at higher levels of participation. So I'd really, it could be 95%, fantastic, but I'd love to know what that data is so that we can understand if the system is working effectively. I'd now like to move us on to slide 10, which relates to specialist capability. Is there sufficient supervisory capacity and capability to safely manage specialist and investigative functions, particularly where experience gaps exist?
So, whilst, and I touched at the beginning around crime reductions, which is really positive, you'll look that what is increasing significantly, as I touched on, areas of vulnerability, and that is they are complex investigations. You know, if someone is reporting child abuse from 20 years ago, where other family members are involved, that is not something that takes a day to resolve. It's complex and timely, and as you quite rightly say, it's incumbent on us that we've got those supervisors who can safely manage that and support it. So we have a crime accreditation meeting which maps and manages completion for our specialist portfolios, including supervisors, and that's overseen by our Assistant Chief Constable Crime, who's got overall responsibility for ensuring that our specialist investigative capabilities are managed in line with demand and the threats are documented within the force management statement. It's also monitored through our quarterly performance review meetings for functions such as protecting vulnerable people and major crime. And as I touched on earlier, at the end of year, the force is at 87% capacity for PIP2, which is the National Detective Accreditation. It was 85% in February, and if I go back 3 or 4 years, it was 51%, so we've come on a real journey around that. 74 officers have attended training in 2025, including 19 direct entry detectives that joined in March 2024. So that detective pipeline is really healthy, and therefore the supervision and management of those investigations is in a strong place. And to become a detective, officers have to undertake the National Investigators Exam, which is quite a complex exam. The last exam was in November, and we had a 75% pass rate, which is higher than the national average. And our first direct entry detective cohort, which was members of the public recruited straight into detective roles, has been a really strong success, particularly compared to other force results. Nationally, we took a lot of learning from other forces and from HMIC in conversations about what worked, what didn't, and that cohort completed their probationary period in March, and that's been a really good cohort in terms of both portfolio completion and also diversity. It's brought us in a different kind of person, which has been really good.
That particular point you're making with regards to members of the public going straight into the detective programme, I think that is sort of music to my ears, and also I suspect the public who have a concern in this space, because I think for quite some time there's been a lot of publicity around a national shortage of detectives. It's not unique to Cheshire, it's obviously happening all over the piece. So, and I know that the case of having members of the public going straight into detective work was not something that was universally accepted as a good thing to do, because there was concerns from others that people needed the foundational part of being a police officer. So it's reassuring to hear that it's working here in Cheshire, and it means that we can improve standards faster than the alternative plans. I'd now like to move us on to slide 11, which links to leadership standards and performance. Is there a sustainable leadership and supervisory pipeline over the next 3 to 5 years, given accelerated recruitment and promotion due to the Police Uplift Programme? And again, for the benefit of members of the public watching, the Police Uplift Programme was the government's requirement for forces to keep officer numbers at a certain level.
Yeah, so we have a workforce planning forecast, which is retirements at each rank over the next 5 years to inform our strategic workforce assessment. So everything from Constable up to Chief Constable. It's become a little bit more complex since the pension changes, because police officers used to retire more or less 30 years to the day and skip out the door. That's changed, and therefore people can stay longer, and it makes Nicola's job of forecasting some of this a lot harder. And those conversations we pick up as part of performance and talent conversations, but it has got to be a little bit delicate, because otherwise it looks like you're trying to kick people out, which we would never want to do. We have mandated the use of talent grids as part of our performance and talent conversations, and some of that is identifying people who are ready for the next rank. Some of that is identifying people who are underperforming in their role, and then a really key part of it is probably the 70 or 80% of our organisation who are the actual soul of it, and just taking the opportunity to say thank you and point out how really sort of valued their core contribution is. We've got a pipeline data for Chief Inspector to Chief Supers for the last 3 years to support officers working towards command positions, so we know that. And we've got a dedicated Sergeant Spotlight programme of work over the last 12 months, focusing on improving our sergeant capacity. That's really key to me, particularly when you look at PUP. We've had a lot of new officers with less than 5 years service. I think a lot of forces have sort of used that almost as an excuse around inexperienced officers. For me, it's also been a really good opportunity, because you're bringing in people with difference, people who think differently, and a bit of fresh blood, so to speak. But that does put an awful lot of demand on our initial sergeant rank, because you've got some very young, very inexperienced cops working really hard in challenging times. So we've put a lot of work into those sergeants and improving that capability and capacity. We've just run a sergeant process. We're filling all our sergeants' vacancies through promotion boards, and we've got a pool of successful officers awaiting posting, which is nice, because it's brought a really competitive process back. Just for comparison, in 2022, we ran a sergeant's process and still had 28 vacancies at the end of it, whereas this time we'll fill our vacancies and we'll have people waiting for jobs.
I mean, that's hugely reassuring, because, organisation does need to have sustainable pipeline of talent coming through the ranks. Every organisation does. It's particularly true when it comes to policing and the safety of our community. So that is really reassuring. And I would also say I was really impressed at the recent attestation evening and celebrating the success of some individuals who've worked extra hard and gone the extra mile. Speaking to those who were involved in the delivery of the How To, I think it was, programme. Abby, I think, if I remember correctly, and how that has become invaluable for newer recruits to understand how to do one of the hundreds of documents that officers have to do as part of the delivery of their role. So it's also great to see that there is that talent coming through doing stuff that is out of the ordinary, innovative, but will make an impact right across the piece. And long may that sort of innovation continue. To what extent are supervisors able to focus on their core responsibilities rather than being drawn into abstraction or performance pressures?
So for me, we need to be really clear when we talk about performance pressures. And I was only saying this morning when I was at Runcorn, policing isn't about numbers. It's about delivering an excellent policing service for the public. It's about being able to answer the phone quickly when people ring us, getting there quickly when we need to, taking positive action to protect victims, and bringing offences to justice. The data we use is only one of the methods we use to monitor some performance, but I see supervising the delivery of an excellent policing service as a core responsibility for any supervisor across the organisation. So when we talk about supervisors being abstracted to manage performance, that absolutely is their job, as long as we think that performance is the delivery of an excellent policing service. That also includes managing abstractions within the team, guiding and developing them, and managing their welfare and safety. And as I said earlier, we utilise performance and talent conversations as a key tool to do that, and also our talent grids to sort of guide people as to where they sit within the organisation. Through Nicola's team, again, they've developed our first line leaders course, which sets out exactly what and how we expect our supervisors to lead. We then have a middle line leaders course, which builds on that, and then a senior leaders training, so that we've got that repeated at every level. And then we've got the Sarge network, which acts as a mechanism for our supervisors to raise ways that they can make their jobs better. Because I think sometimes when you're not in a job and you don't understand the complexities of it, it's very easy to point out potential solutions and you could do this, you could do that. So actually we brought the people who are doing that job together, and some of the initial findings they've had have been really quite impressive. So in response to one of the simple things they asked for was the recognition hub, and what that means is if I don't supervise Paul, but he's done something or I've seen something really good, I can put a line straight on his performance and talent conversation, which saves emails flying around and is actually a little bit more, at the end of a year, you can reflect on it and think. So that came from them and has gone down really well.
That's really interesting, that particular last point, giving other colleagues the chance to just give very quick recognition of the hard work that their fellow colleagues are doing. I suppose abstractions are always going to happen. There are sometimes very big operations happening, which as a consequence there are going to be abstractions, which I think is all part of maintaining the safety this county is renowned for. But obviously it's a balance, isn't it? That abstraction rate is something that has to be not a distraction from the role that they've been assigned to. You know, it needs to be the exception to the norm as opposed to the everyday experience. So I think, and we're going to see it obviously as we go through the neighbourhood policing piece over the next year when we talk about abstractions there. But of course this talks about it in the supervisory context. So I listen to the point that you're making there around the supervisor on occasions will be abstracted into doing something else, but actually that's all part and parcel of the supervisory function. But it's all about that threshold again, isn't it? If they're doing it 95% of the time, well, they're in the wrong job to some extent. But if they're doing it 5% of the time, then that feels a bit more in line with what the role is designed for. Now, I'm just giving those numbers as hypotheticals, but I think it explains to the public that we don't want people en masse abstracted, do we? We want people to do the job that they are paid for, that they are skilled for, and it's on the constabulary to manage that effectively, right? Okay, I would like to move us now on to slide 12 and 13. This overlaps, but it's around health, well-being and sickness. Sickness is increasing, which is a worry to see. Do we know why and what impact this is having on the wider workforce in terms of resilience and abstractions? Yeah,
so when you say sickness is increasing, it's only increasing seasonally. So it's not a year-on-year trend or anything. It's you see it throughout. And one of the issues this year was around the strain in flu virus not being as effective with our flu vaccines that we offer across the force. But in terms to answer your question, so...
Sorry, just on that particular one. Looking at that chart, what I'm really referring to is you can see March versus March. So you can see that I do get that there's fluctuations, of course.
Yeah.
But the March in the previous year being the trough compared to the March this year. So, and it might all be down to flu, but I just think that's the point I'm referring to. I always accept that there will be fluctuations. Yeah, but it was the...
Fair enough. When you look at it over a longer period of time, it's quite a consistent... I accept showing it in a 12-month snapshot gives you a difference of less than 1%. But
it's the constabulary's data. I just want to reassure you on
absolutely.
that.
No, it is, but I'm just... So we've got robust oversight of wellbeing, sickness, absence and abstraction. It's covered each month at our SCT, which is our Senior Command Team, and People Services Boards, Force Performance Day, Area and Departmental Quarterly Performance Reviews. It is broadly stable with a winter spike, October to December, followed by improvement, and there's no current evidence of systemic resilience or retention risk, and ill health retirements remain low. Our medium and long-term sickness cases are subject to monthly critical case reviews to ensure appropriate and timely intervention, and our HR business partners actively monitor local abstraction risks supported by our people data packs. We have a comprehensive wellbeing offer in place, including occupational health, trauma support, St Michael's Lodge, traumatic incident debriefs, fast-track mental health referrals and proactive support for high-risk roles. So when you talked earlier about visiting our OK team, they are one of the teams that get more proactive support because of what they are exposed to. And we have an early mental health questionnaire for stress-related absence to support quicker interventions and reduce absence duration. And working time, leave, overtime and rest days in lieu are monitored for fatigue risk. Custody shift pattern changes are addressing our toil accrual as well.
I mean, you make a good point around it being a 12 months. So I think what I would like to do is, if we could take away the action of providing, let's look at the equivalent over a 3-year period. I think that would at least give us some of the sort of seasonality that you've referred to. But I think it's helpful to give that extra as to what the support looks like for those who are on leave of absence around sickness. I mean, it's one of the things that I ask a lot when I go around the constabulary, when I visit parts of the constabulary. It's one of the areas that I ask officers a lot around what happens when work gets too tough. And I say that because being either a member of staff or a police officer, it's not a job like other jobs. You are witnessing trauma in a way in which most people in work witness very, very rarely. I'm making quite a sweeping statement there, but most people, thankfully, don't witness huge amounts of trauma in their day-to-day work. That obviously is not the case for people who join policing, and some of the scenes that they attend, as well as the material that they have to review, is hugely traumatic on them. So I think, broadly speaking, seeing that sickness level is relatively low is a reassurance, but I would love to be reassured that there isn't a rise happening and that it is only a seasonal blip that we're seeing.
We do a lot as well, on the so our traumatic incident debriefs on a very quick. So we have a really good structure for if we have a horrific road traffic collision or something. Yeah. That very quick debrief of everyone before they go home, and then the structured sort of traumatic incident debriefs over the coming days and weeks. We also monitor which teams. So we've got one particular team in the Specialist Collision Investigation Unit who have dealt with 3 really horrific jobs in the last month. So Nicola's team are supporting out, sorting some bespoke support for them. We do track it at a local and team level to make sure, because there is only so much any human, as you quite rightly say, can be exposed to in a lifetime.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, could we now move on to slide 15? This refers to diversity, inclusion and culture, which are, I believe, really important parts of having a police force which looks and feels like the community it serves. And I'm particularly interested in the performance, taking into account volume and performance metrics, but also looking at sound judgment, ethical decision-making and effective leadership. How is this performance considered?
So our performance management framework, Raising the Bar, outlines how performance is managed at a force, area and departmental level. And it's clearly articulated that performance metrics are one understanding of performance, but not the only one. And I touched on earlier, it's that constant reinforcement about why. Why does it matter if we answer 999 calls in under 3 seconds? Because there's a victim at the end of the phone who's ringing, who's asking something. The force use a wide range of quantitative and qualitative information, as well as internal and external audit and quality assurance. And on an individual level, performance and talent conversations and talent grids discussions cover both performance objectives and, importantly, how they are achieved. And the behaviours expected of our leaders are clearly articulated in the Force Leadership Charter, and that forms the basis of our leadership development programme.
I appreciate that honest answer there. One of the things that I am wanting to just ask a little bit more about is I have just noticed that there has been changes, relatively small changes with regards to ethnic minority, but actually as a whole, we have I think it was 2.33% of the force with an ethnic minority, and it's come down to 2.17%. And equally, sexual orientation not declared, 41% previously, and down to 38%. Are we asking questions about why those changes have happened, or are we just accepting them? The one in particular, the sexual orientation one, is one that it sort of feels at odds with the general movement that's happening in the country at large, which is that people do feel more comfortable talking about their sexual orientation. So that one that just it caught my attention.
That's a reduction.
So
it's gone from...
Sorry, not declared. Yes.
Yeah, so it's a reduction, so we've improved. We've gone from 41% to now more people are declaring.
Interesting. Okay, because it's the way that the change is presented as a negative. You see what I mean? It looks like it's going down. I get the point. We're talking about the explanation of one area doesn't necessarily align with then the negative on the other side. It probably should be viewed. We should change the wording or flip.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
I see. So you'd be saying sexual orientation declared, and then it's an increase of 3%,
yes,
as opposed to reduction.
Exactly. Okay. Well, that's a good outcome.
What we do see with that, though, is that is linked, I think anyway, through our data to national and international. So you look at some of the vitriol that was spouted in the last 12 months, that can impact actually if I am transgender, and you look at the transgender rulings, am I going to out myself? So there's, Sure. Okay. And with regards to ethnic minority, I mean, Cheshire is not the most ethnically diverse community in the country. I think we know that. But are we benchmarking that against the demographics of the county? And are we questioning, I'm just curious about this because we do need to make sure that the policing looks and feels like the community that it serves. Absolutely. And in December, I did touch on, we were named again in the inclusive top 50 employers list, so the IT 50. I think we were 13th or 15, sorry, which particularly celebrates organisations leading the way in diversity and inclusion. So whilst I accept our metrics might not be where we want to be, I think our processes are right, and then it's how we continue to attract people. We do monitor for any indications that minority groups don't feel supported. For example, 4.3% of officer resignations so far this year are from ethnic minorities, which is slightly higher than the force, 2.2%, but that's for individuals. And when you're in those small metrics, so yes, we understand the metrics, and then again, it's the why. So Nicola's team are really keen to get into the bottom of that. We know, for example, 37% of officer resignations from the force are females, whereas females account for 38% of the force population. So a slightly higher proportion of females leave due to personal circumstances than males, and 31% of males tend to leave due to work-life balance and well-being, compared to 29% of females. So they are small differences, but I suppose the assurance I'm trying to give you is that we drill down into them and try and understand them. We've got an active range of networks representing minority groups. Each one of them has a chief officer lead. So all of our chief officers will lead a minority network, and they also have a regular meeting with the chief, with none of the other senior leaders there. So if there are issues to raise, they've got direct access to the chief. And we take all instances of hate crime against the public and officers and staff very seriously, and we've got Operation Hampshire as our approach to supporting colleagues assaulted on duty.
I was just trying to get some advice there. I'm not sure at what point the ethics panel has ever reviewed this data set, and I think it probably makes sense to refer some of this so that it can have a slightly deeper dive to the ethics panel, just for them to be reassured and to some extent either tease out areas for improvement or actually give us all the reassurance that the things that we're seeing are absolutely as they also see it, which I think just makes a lot of sense. There's nothing to hide here.
Absolutely not.
This is about making sure that the constabulary looks and feels like the community that it serves. But I accept the point when you've got a very small number of people who are an ethnic minority, for instance, a small number leaving can have a significant impact, and it could be a one-off one year that is not going to happen next year, and it might not have happened previous years. So I think that probably feels like the right thing. If we refer some of that back to them, and they can do a deeper dive. But I appreciate the sort of thorough answers that you've given there. Can I now go to slide 16? And this is our last slide, and it's about overall risk and the forward look. How confident are you that workforce plans are operationally and financially sustainable, including the management of police officer incremental pay progression within current and future budgets?
So as you know, the medium-term financial scenario and the operational demands that we are seeing do pose a significant risk over the coming years. We've delivered £50 million worth of savings over the last 10 years, and we've set a budget for 26-27, which saved a further 4.9 million. And despite that, the financial scenario means a further 19.6 million worth of savings is required by 30-31, with 8.3 million in 27-28 alone. Cognizant that 77% of our force budget is spent on staffing, And I've already talked about the operational challenges brought about by increases in complex vulnerability crime, registered sex offenders, and then government policy change such as the Crime and Sentencing Act, along with the impact of global uncertainty. Everyone is feeling the squeeze around petrol prices. Well, when you've got a fleet of hundreds of vehicles on the road 24/7, that plays into our... So there are things that are beyond our control that pose us a challenge. The warranted powers and flexibility in deployment of police officers are critical in responding to the operational threats that are outlined in the force management statement. And we have our strategic planning and PBB processes in place, as well as our AI enablement programme, where we continue to drive efficiency to release operational capacity and deliver cashable savings. Although I think it is worthy of saying that I don't think there is a force in the country yet that have delivered true cashable savings through AI. So it is a challenge, and it's very much, as you say, front and centre media conversations, but I think it is a little bit of proceed with caution, which we are doing, hence the Home Office recognition. And as you know, the balance in the financial scenario and maintaining public safety in the face of rising operational demand is extremely challenging, but it'll form part of our a large part of our budget discussions throughout the year, and they started pretty much the day the previous year's budget was signed off. Yeah. We'll continue.
I mean, I think what the public at large won't necessarily have an awareness of is around officer pay and how it does increment up with service. And you contrast that with other roles, it doesn't necessarily get, in wider society, pay progression doesn't happen necessarily in the same way. And so when you do look at the budget, you can see some of those real pressures as we've got officers who are now moving up through the ranks as we want. But obviously it will be a significant financial cost. So yes, we're proud to have the highest numbers of officers, but as we know, this doesn't come for free. We use a huge amount of our budget to make sure that we have those resources. And you're right, Deputy Chief Constable, to refer to the sheer number as a percentage of the budget. 77% is spent on officer and staff pay. So there's huge amounts that is spent on paying for individuals. And I absolutely accept that point around cashable savings. What I would caveat that with is that they're not delivering cashable savings until they do. And then all of a sudden, they do everywhere. And it's in the same way that, we're looking at other organisations and who are being very ambitious, not necessarily in the public sector, but in the private sector, that are announcing huge headcount reductions around the adoption of AI. And they're probably slightly ahead of regulated industries and organisations like policing for obvious reasons.
Probably less risk, because if we replace our control room staff, for argument's sake, with automation and it breaks, that's a victim of crime ringing 999 and not getting an answer. So I would, if I worked for a supermarket, I would be far more comfortable introducing AI than probably as a emergency service. But that's a public sector challenge that we'll face. It
is. And the onus is on us, is that we have systems that don't break. That's what it boils down to. That we've seen some very large organisations, you're right to use supermarkets, one example, who've been subject to significant sort of cyber threats, and it's been hugely expensive for them, and they've had to change their organisation for an unknown period of time while they've got through that. Policing is subjected to a higher level of risk because of the nature of the individuals who want to access the information that policing have hold of. But the reality is, we have resilient plans, and those are used as and when required. But the working model has to be that these things don't go down. In the same way that we have a working model that custody suites do not suddenly become open. You know what I mean? We have to make sure that these things are viewed at the same level of sort of resilience as other functions in policing. And so I accept that there's the challenges, but we're in challenging times and we've got to rise to them. That's what I believe that we have to do, and I think that's what the public expect us to do. So my final question, and then I haven't got any other questions with regards to the broader Commissioner questions. I think we've done a pretty thorough job so far this morning, is how are you measuring workforce productivity and effectiveness, and what evidence demonstrates improved outcomes rather than simply maintaining volume?
And as I said, I think I've said it a few times, I'm really keen that we don't talk about the numbers, and it actually sounds a bit strange saying that when you are pretty much the best performing force in the country, but behind every one of those numbers is a victim of crime or similar. So we utilise the Her Majesty's Inspectorate and Constabulary value for money profiles as part of our force management statement and our PPB process, and that compares resource distribution across most similar forces and also nationally. So we can see how we stack up against Northamptonshire, and then we can see how we stack up against the likes of the Metropolitan Police. And those value for money profiles will tell you all different areas of the organisation, where you're spending money and how that looks. That's also reported through to the Joint Audit Advisory Committee and informs the overall scrutiny in relation to resource allocation and any thematic reviews undertaken in year. The force performance management arrangements all include information in relation to resource capability and capacity, as well as performance outcomes, and that includes specific resource information at force performance days and our quarterly performance reviews. We use a range of audit and quality assurance arrangements to monitor and report on quality, because again, it's not about the numbers, it's the quality and the level of service that people are getting from us as an organisation as part of our performance arrangements as well. And that means we've got a balance of resource availability, quantity and quality. And then through the Constabulary AI programme, the force is undertaking specific reviews of some functions to identify where productivity and efficiency savings are possible, whether that's using technology or not. And what's been really good watching them work as a team is they've gone into departments around where could we embrace AI, but they've also collected things where you go, well, hang on, that's not AI and it's not robotics, but we do need to process change. So actually, now let's take them away and drive those incremental efficiencies as well.
I mean, that's reassuring. I think that commitment to AI and automation is very clear in the policing crime plan. It's something that was very clear throughout our budget discussions in the previous year. It's something that is going to be a constant going forward, and I think it's the public expect it, because the organisations that they work for or worked for are doing the same sort of stuff. I've always banged the drum for making sure that our public services are just as modernising and reforming as the private sector is. The big difference being that they can go bust, and as a consequence, only the most innovative ones come through. We obviously don't want constabularies going bust. We obviously don't want public services going bust. We're a different business model, different organisation structure, but we can't sort of deny the need to innovate and reform. So I think there's going to be a lot more talk and a lot more questions at future scrutiny around this work. But I know I've already seen some promising signs within the AI enablement programme, and I'm sure we're going to talk through that for the rest of this year. That does conclude my scrutiny meeting today. I don't have any other business to raise. I know there's an awful lot happening today in the Constabulary, so I'd like to thank you for your time being here, taking this as serious as it is, the important checks and balances that this office uses with the Constabulary, and I'd wish you well for the rest of the week. Thank you very much.